and a public-private initiative to reduce costs. All capital expenditures should have a set-aside for future costs that should be acknowledged during the budget process. The $900,000 grant for the Simsbury Performing Arts is just the beginning of increased expenditures needed to sustain the project. Simsbury Meadows is on a floodplain adjacent to the river, an area most likely to flood. The projection of over 100 apartments adjacent to Simsbury Meadows will place an increased risk on the land. Permanent bathrooms require a pumping station that has to be maintained. Over the years, the grass has been paved over, leaving less land for absorption, leading to flooding. Iron Horse Boulevard, permanent structures, and a paved parking lot, all adding to less water absorption. This project is not economically feasible and will increase flooding in the area. Large entertainment venues is not one of the core services that should be managed by the town. This project will continue to be a drain on the future budgets and should be eliminated. The $50,000 not included in the budget for the drainage at Simsbury Farms parking area is foolhardy, since the area freezes over in the winter and places people at risk using the area. This is a public safety issue and should be included in the budget. The taxpayers of Simsbury should not be supporting a failed business plan with Simsbury Volunteer Ambulance Services. Avon just reviewed their contract with AMR Ambulance Service at no cost to the taxpayer with good results. The budgets as presented need more fine-tuning to reduce expenditures. Increasing budgets affect the residents, businesses, and property values. The Board of Finance should be bold in their demands for accountability and consider the budgets have consequences. Increasing the budget in an uncertain economy is just kicking the can down the road. The approved budget should not place an undue burden on the taxpayers. All of my comments will be posted on Simsbury Patch and Twitter at Joan Co. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Joan. You state your name. Thank you, Tom. Name and address, please. Thank you.
One more.
Oh, let's go.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, I'm Lori Boyko from 15 Oakhurst Road. I'd like to start by level setting this conversation with some clarifications. Throughout the Board of Ed meeting last night, the phrase "how much we're cutting" was used over and over again. Let's please be clear. The Board of Ed budget is not a cut. It's a 4-point-something% increase instead of the 6 or 7% wish list increase they had hoped for. But this is not a cut. Additionally, in many, many cases, nothing was cut at all. Resources were reallocated by using a retiring position to fill another role, or a position saved by a reduction in the needed number of classrooms being used to fund another position. Some money was slid over from a grant for equipment into positions. There were a few reductions from the original ask, but the bulk of this was reallocation. In any industry at all, when revenues are down, expenses are always reduced. No CEO gets to increase spending 6 or 7 or even 4% in down revenue cycles. The difference here is there are never any revenues to speak of. There is only the money collected from residents who are already experiencing income reductions against cost of living increases. You can't squeeze a lemon when there's nothing left but rind. We're not paying bills in percentages, we're paying them in real dollars. For perspective, at the beginning of this school year, Simsbury High School SPTC donations were down by half. These are nominal donations, $10, $20, $30, down by half. If that doesn't indicate how residents are doing financially, I don't know what does. Just this week, the rugby team at the high school that had a planned vacation week trip to Washington, D.C., canceled their trip because the team bus was going to cost too much more than it did last year. So there are students already experiencing cuts by decisions of their booster clubs against the cost of living increases right now. We do have a number of unfunded mandates from the state to contend with. It is going to cost us, for example, and this number's from the Board of Ed, about $25,000 to install tampon dispensers in most of the bathrooms. That would cover the 2.2 desired position for the increase in the strings instructor if we decided to use baskets on the counters instead of $365 each bathroom dispensers. That being said, the state did remove the mandate for the capstone class requirement. Yet the curriculum committee decided to keep that graduation requirement without further discussion by the board, with no conversation about the need for that requirement. I'm not exactly sure what the cost savings would be, but I believe the salary plus benefits for that position, which maybe could be reallocated, is over $100,000 a year. The book budget was cut from $110,000 to $50,000. But I have the invoices from last year's books. They came to $43,718. So I don't know what the rest of the $70,000 was. I don't know if they were, $50,000 of subscriptions, but I think there's still some savings to be had. In these, there was some discussion last night about whether we were hamstringing the schools by not ordering more books for the libraries. In these invoices, they order things that I call mystery boxes. They're just giant boxes of teen romance or fantasy or sci-fi or Pokemon series. Some are individual books that are ordered, but many are just big boxes.
Lori, it's been 5 minutes.
Okay. So the question about the role of the Board of Ed is, I think there's got to be a balance between excellence and real people and families' budgets. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Jeff? Jeff, if you could state your address and full name.
Jeff Dornberg, 225 Old Farms Road, 658-1196. I am current president of the Simsbury Performing Arts Center Board, the volunteer board. I'm here to ask for your support in this budget for the money that's already in the budget to put towards this project. There's a lot of talk out there about this project, and I just want to let you know, from my perspective, the money that's in the budget for this project is 20% of the budget. There's other money that had been allocated to us a few years ago. When you throw that money into it, it's less than a third of the budget. We just heard you talk about public-private partnership. This is a public-private partnership. Simsbury's paying a third of the building that Simsbury gets to use. So there's lots of questions. Mike, I saw that there's a bunch of questions that you guys have about some of the specifics of this. You can ask, I don't think you can ask me now because it's a public forum, but anytime, please, you guys know how to get me. I want to answer all these questions. Most of them are pretty straightforward. I could answer them in the hall if you needed to. So thank you for your time. Thank you for all your efforts, and thank you, I hope, for your support.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak in the public audience? Seeing none. Lindy, you call up the first selectman to give her presentation on the Board of Selectmen approved budget for the fiscal year 2024.
Art, how was your ride?
It was good.
Good.
Everybody knows about my ride.
Yeah, we heard about it.
Not as cool as it sounds, trust me, but
I've been on a
It's
corporate
convenient.
helicopter once and it's not fun, that was scary. Ready? Are you taking my picture? Sorry, I always have to make a joke. If my husband's watching, he's probably embarrassed about me. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen's budget presentation to the Board of Finance. A couple things, I'm gonna try to hit all the highlights that we covered on Saturday, March 9th, and on Monday, March 11th. We spent from 9 to 5 on the 9th and from 6 to 10 on the 11th. So there was a lot of due diligence on our part that went into that, and I wanted to preface that. The other thing I'm gonna try to do is to talk slow, because I was told a resident called in and said that I talk too fast during our meeting, so I'm going to try to speak as slow as I can without being too boring. So I wanna start out with a couple opening comments. I wanna thank our Board of Selectmen. We have 4 new members who worked really hard on this budget, and we think we did a really good job. There's 2 of us that returned, who had done 2 budgets together before. And we actually, 2 years ago, we made a commitment on a pilot that we funded, and we made the commitment by bringing it back to the table this year. And we actually ended up cutting a position that was a pilot. So we did do our due diligence fiscally to make sure we could follow up on things we said we would follow up on. A couple things I wanna talk about is, so we're shaping the hall for shaping town hall in this town manager form of government. And tonight we'll talk about the positions that we included in our budget. These are staff that Mark Nelson emphasized that he needed to move forward to make town hall an efficient operation, which I'm not saying that it's not, but we're looking to the future now. Technology focused, customer service municipal government, and that will improve over the next few years. We're looking to have a stronger HR department, so that the residents, the staff have somewhere to go that is responsive to their needs for retirements and such. We wanna include extra services in the customer facing areas of the assessor, tax collector, and town clerk. We've added a position to public works so that we can do additional maintenance to vehicles. And then we also included a PD clerk to keep us compliant, and it's a result of the CERTA study, which did ask for 2. I just wanna also comment, I know this is not the public hearing, but I do wanna acknowledge that I'm a resident here, and all of us on the board are residents, and these tax increases hit all of us. Last year I had a $600 tax increase or so, this year I'll see another $500 increase, so we don't take these lightly, we are funding what we feel the town needs to move forward. Couple other things, we don't have ARPA funds anymore, we had it for 2 years, we created new projects that help contribute to economic development. We did not create cliffs with the money, we paid for some capital projects, but this year the $7.5 million funding is gone. Economic development came out as one of our top priorities for our board. One thing I do wanna say, that residents in town need to be willing to accept new businesses, creative housing, and other ideas, or else we will have to accept future tax increases. So those are the trade-offs. And then the other thing is, we had some key capital projects that are included in their budget. The Flower Bridge, the Terriffill pickleball courts, the East Coast Greenway, and also the Performing Arts Center. So this is our new board, 2023 to 2025. Again, I said this before, we had a really collegial discussion, we collaborated, there was a lot of give and take on the board, and we all ended up approving this budget. People were willing to discuss things, people conceded, people heard what other people said, and this is where we ended up. So the Board of Selectmen, we're still in our goal setting process right now, but the high level areas that we're focused on are up here. We have some detail behind them. We need to continue, and we plan to do that over the next month. But the top one to all of us was economic development, because we realized the need for some grandless growth in order to pay for the services that we have. Another one that's up here that I just want to call out is the technology and transparency. That was another one we all agreed on, and we pretty much agreed on most of these, but those are the ones that rose to the top. This is our budget calendar. I think I'm missing some at the end, but we're at 3/19/2024. We'll meet on Monday night and address any concerns that we have to as a follow-up from tonight, and then the public hearing will be on 4/3, followed by potentially another public hearing, and then the referendum in May. Okay? So I'm gonna get into some of the numbers here. We have an operating budget of $28,103,721, which is about 25% of the total. Which is pretty much the norm, 25% for the town budget, 75% to the Board of Ed budget. This came out to be about a 3.34 increase, but with the transfers in the line items, it's a 2.93. And I kept the numbers with the ARPA excluded because the Board of Finance asked us to hit the 3.5 number, so this is relative to those numbers. So we did come in under the ask of the Board of Finance. If you look at the mill rate without the fire district, with it's 32.84. There's another thing I will talk about in here, but we did talk about a investment income revenue increase of $500,000. That kind of got away from all of us on Monday night. And so I'm showing the mill rate, but with that and without that. So with that $500,000, that brings the mill rate to 32.68. I don't know why I'm looking up there, I have it in front of me, but and the median home increase for that, I think it's around a $390,000 home. Without the $500,000, it's a $553 increase. With the 500 increase in revenue, it's about a $509 increase in taxes. And then the budget drivers, we all have heard about the motor vehicle mill rate, lack of motor vehicle revenue because of the mill rate change where the state set a mill rate and we fell below it last year, so there was a gap in funding. And that's why we did not receive the $1.5 million. And then again, fixed costs are due to salaries, benefits, health insurance, and inflationary impacts. Just the revenue assumptions that we're going with, we had a 0.06 very nominal grand list growth this year. The tax collection rate stayed the same at 98.5. The state revenues, ECS increased by 261. Most of the other revenues remained flat. And then again, the motor vehicle mill rate discrepancy on our part here. And the other thing I wanted to put out there for a revenue assumption, if we include the $500,000, we would be adding that. And we haven't approved it, but we are hoping that it'll happen somewhere between you guys and in the next go around. And then Amy just gave me just to kind of show the grand list growth. We took out the middle column, doesn't show the reval because with the reval it's 26.95, but it kind of shows you how we kind of just dropped off this year. And the projection for next year is not very high. And then in each of the out years, there was just a projection of a $10 million, just a flat increase, so that will change. So here's the budget overview as it was approved. Again, it was the 28,103. The 2.93 is where we ended up, and that results in the 553 mill rate tax increase impact to on your average home. We were hearing from the Board of Ed. They came in with 4.41. Is that? So this eventually will change to accommodate there. This is prior to the.
That's already 441.
That's 4.
They separate school and non-public schools, so the combined school and non-public schools is 441.
Oh, so that's it's already baked in? Oh, okay, good. All right. So that's baked in there. And then this is the version that includes a $500,000. So I just added it into the revenue item. And then again, it doesn't change our budget, but it does impact the bottom line and results in a lower tax impact. So I'm gonna talk about just some of the changes. And I did leave something out, so I will just mention it. But we eliminated this youth and family social worker. That was the 2-year pilot that I referenced. And we pulled that out because it wasn't a person issue. The person was great, but it wasn't meeting the expectations of the role or the need. And so that was taken out. The SVAA, we moved to reserves. That was questioned during our budget hearing, whether it should be in reserves or if it should stay in operating. But since this is the first year and we're working on the contract/MOU, we felt we could fund it out of reserves, not hit the taxpayer with it until we really knew where we were going with that. And it gave us some room to move here. And then the contingency, we increased the vacancy rate to 350. Simsbury Farms, the contribution, I think that was for pension. Was that what it was for? And originally it was going to go into the budget, but now we're gonna push that to year-end savings, so there's no impact here for that. And then our friends in Public Works, we're pretty generous. We cut $100,000 in the paving budget for this year, and also in the usage of salt in case we have other snowstorms. We cut the Iron Horse median, that was in the CNR budget, it was $60,000 over 2 years, and instead there's some work for Tom to do here, but it's not the complete picture of what we're going to do. So that's a reduction of the original town manager budget of $725,749. I've included the $500,000 just to keep reminding us to put it in there. And then a couple other things, we did fund the outside agencies, we kept them flat, but we did move the chamber. We had a lot of conversation on the chamber, and although it's a small amount, we moved it to contingency to understand, what the role is. They no longer have their office. So we're gonna talk to Ray Lagan at the chamber and see what they're serving us with and how we fund that going forward. There's a question, Amy worked with the Board of Finance, I think, was it earlier this week or last week? Last week, yeah. We had conversations on our board about the CNR payback, which normally is for 16.5. There was a new approach that was done here, so Amy was taking that to the Board of Finance, and they're gonna talk about that later and will guide us on where we're going to go with that. But I just wanted to mention that here because that would eliminate the $60,000 that we were paying over the next 5 years for that. One thing I did not include in the deck, which I forgot, was the additional funding for the Main Street Partnership / Economic Development. We had been funding them at $50,000 over the last few years, and in the economic development push from our board, Mark asked for $100,000. We did a lot of discussing on that at the Board of Selectmen meeting, but we ended up keeping the $100,000 funding, I think with a $50,000 in contingency until we figure out another area where we have an MOU / contract that needs to be developed. And then there were 4 staffing changes in addition to the elimination of a position. These were critical items from our town manager. We took them seriously. We talked through them over both days. And we ended up approving all 4 positions. The HR, the department is really a restructuring that Mark sees as a separate entity outside of the town manager's office with an HR director and a generalist to do a lot of the paperwork. And that will help facilitate discussions of town hall staff to have somewhere that they can go to meet privately with HR. The town hall administrative specialist will cover the assessor, town clerk, and tax collector's office. The mechanic driver is a need for Public Works, and that was funded for a half a year. Tom was able to allow that to happen. And the police records clerk, this is I said before, this is the outcome of the study. There's also a CNR request that's tied to this, which you'll see in the CNR. But I just wanted to make some comments on some of the questions that we asked during our budget. Was we did ask if there was salary research done on the positions related to the HR department, and the town manager's office did do some research on comparable positions throughout the related municipalities. These numbers include benefits and payroll taxes. The information comp and classification study, which we know is in progress, but a lot of that was incorporated into some of these potential job descriptions. And just to have you know that the personnel subcommittee will be involved, as will the full board, but to review the results of this study and also to approve job description and changes. So we will be in the loop on how these positions roll out. I'm gonna keep plowing through unless you want me to stop somewhere. You guys want me to stop? I mean, I'm just.
Keep plowing.
Okay, I don't wanna bore you. Okay, capital improvement plan. So capital improvement plan, I'm gonna just highlight some of the key projects up here. The one that I highlight is the Flower Bridge. So it shows as a 2.646. Last year we approved about 1.9 million on that. It's technically going to be funded through ARPA. It ended up being funded differently, which happened behind the scenes, Board of Finance and the Finance Director. But that was a critical project that the Board of Selectmen the prior board found value in because it was really, it's a community area. We wanted to use ARPA. We had people come from the public who were interested in making sure that that maintained its icon status, and we brought it up to code. So right now there's a $500,000 difference of what came in for the estimates. And that's why the increase is on here, and it's back on here because it needs to go back to referendum. The Terriffill connection, as you know, that's like a high priority for all of us. We've invested money, but we've gotten a lot of grants thanks to the Public Works and Engineering team. And they're continuing to get grants to make that project happen, which is also a critical project in the community.
Wendy, this 2.6 for the Flower Bridge is in addition to the 1.9?
No, it includes a 1.9. So that was already approved last year, but again, it was put on here because it's gonna go to referendum and it was being shown as the percentage of budget that it needed to be, unless.
So even though it was approved at 1.9, we have to go to referendum on the full amount, because we're changing the bonding language, so this is bond counsel's advice. One of the questions we'll have is what happens if it fails? Does that 1.9 still remain, or does the whole project fail? I don't know if we have that answer yet. We don't have that, so that we'll have for the hearing.
Okay. So let's see, I'm gonna move over to the Culture Parks and Rec. So we had a lot of discussion on both of the CPR projects. Great deal of discussion on the splash pad. And it's made it into the budget. We actually discussed it because the options for Memorial Pool were not great. The other part of that is the design. This is the design work, but the actual project is subject or available to have grant funding, and it originally was put in here as about $950 in bonding, and we changed that to show pretty much half of that as grant funded, so it's not a $1 million bond hit to the budget, it's hopefully a $500,000 grant, or maybe more, right? And then we included the Meadows Performing Arts Center. So this has been on the radar for multiple years since I've been on the board. Last year it was put into the budget for this year. The price has gone up to 2.7, but I did include some of the numbers that we have previous funding, which we have the $350,000 that we keep saying is from the bathrooms, but it was incorporated into the full building project. We did receive a DECD grant through the State Bond Commission for almost $1 million. And part of the reason we got that grant was because we made the case on how important the park was to the town, and that it's an icon in the center of town. It draws people to the community, and the state agreed and funded that. And then we are setting aside $500,000 in reserves because we want to see this project move forward. But it does leave the PAC with quite a chunk of funding to happen. They have so far, from the last go around, there was about $400,000 that was already committed. So there is a balance here of money that needs to be raised that Jeff is well aware of. And then this Board of Ed, we did cut the district flooring because it was a every other year project. So we took out this year's given the tight budget that we had. And Jason was here and did not make the case that it had to happen this year, so we just figured we would start it out 2 years from now. This auditorium and amphitheater improvements, that is also, it was put together as one project, it's really two projects. One was about $260 for the amphitheater, and the rest was to get started on the Simsbury High auditorium lighting and curtains. And they bundled it up and put it in the CIP. And then the roof for Tooten Hills, the questions came up, was it leaking? We were told it's not really leaking at this point in time, and could we move it out? But if you look at the budget next year, I believe Henry James or Central School, and the year after is Henry James, so there's not really anywhere else to move it. So it's in this year's budget. And then this is just the distribution on where the funding's coming from. Then we get into CNR projects, we didn't really, there's a lot of CNR projects in here. I don't really have any that I feel the need to highlight, at least in the public works realm, and I lumped all the public works together, so I apologize, Tom. The CPR projects, we did talk a bit about the apple barn and the need for the roof and the carpets there, and we were told it was pretty important that it's a revenue source and people rent it out all the time. That was one of the items that we did question. There was discussion around the pickleball courts in Terriffill. And we've been delayed on this because of the FEMA maps. But this project was a critical item from a prior board and how important this was to Terriffill. And the things that we're doing in Terriffill, like the new, not the charrette, but the mini charrette that's happening. The improvements that we're doing to the park, the trail system, and the $100,000 is an estimate from Tom Taberski of the overage that potentially could happen. And because we've waited so long, the funding needs to be there because as soon as the FEMA maps are good to go, we wanna be good to go. And if we don't fund it here, it'll have to come back as a supplemental appropriation, which we know the Board of Finance doesn't like doing all the time, so we're accounting for it here during the budget. Let's see what else we have here. Oops, sorry, why am I not moving? Okay, there we go. A couple on here that I would just like to call out. My favorite one up here is the budget software, ClearGov. I think this will be a great enhancement to everyone to have, if you go to multiple municipalities around the state, they're already using it. It's a great tool, it's really clear to look at your budget. You can look at historical budgets and compare things all in like an online version. The first phase, I believe, is to move capital to it and it'll streamline how we budget capital and how we look at it. So it's a big improvement at not a lot of cost. The neighborhood planning in small area, we question that. We did approve, the prior board approved $150,000 to do this mini charrette for Terriffill. And it was broken out as $50,000 over 3 years. So this is part of that funding. The CNR did have it going out multiple years, which we said we would want them to come back and tell us what other areas we're going to do, because for now, we really just discussed Terriffill. And then zoning regulations, the zoning commission is looking to update the regulations that they have. Oh, do you wanna ask a question? Cause I feel like I'm being boring. No, like ask me.
I'm on the network switches, the security cameras, are those different from what we approved in a supplemental appropriation a couple months ago?
Did we?
The network switches, I believe you did in year end. That was the supplement funding so if you look at the current year CNR, the network switches was a 2-year program. The year one funding was not enough to cover the town hall and the PD, so the year end transfer, I believe, was to supplement that. And then this was the amount we were showing for year 2 for the library.
And are these security cameras different from the cameras that the chief described to us a couple months ago? What kind of security cameras are these?
This program covers basically townwide, all the town facilities that have security cameras.
I see, okay, then it's not.
It's not the road cameras that the chief got.
Okay, all set?
Yeah.
Okay, I did wanna call out a couple items in the police department. They kind of go along with the records clerk and records, moving the records along. One is digitizing the records, so they're not just all paper. And the other is the records office, which really goes hand in hand with the staff. We were told without the staff needed the room to happen, so we approved the money to renovate the room also.
So we're digitizing records, but then we're also making changes to store more records? Is that how I read that?
We're
Right, the storage renovation that's below the digitization of records?
So right now we have 2 areas where we store our records. And both of them are, well, one of them has high density storage. That will be office space, working space for somebody. because we have no room right now. We actually had to take probably a 10 by 10 section from there last year or the year before to create office space for administrator. So we need to create some space and then put high density storage in our second area, which is on the other side of the building, so we can store some of the stuff that we need to take or that we need to keep. The digitization just goes right along with that, because not only do we have things that we have to keep for 30 plus more years right now, we want, moving forward, we wanna be able to start to reduce this that we have to store. So they definitely go hand in hand, but the current large space that we have now in the office area would be converted to working space and office space for one, potentially two records clerks.
Gotcha, thank you.
I have a question for the chief as well. You have police cruisers 3 for 121, that's normally 180 for 3. So are you buying 3 cruisers for 120?
No, so it's been a very odd time for us. During the pandemic, there was a period where we could not get cars and they kept being delayed, so we pushed the current cars at that time sort of past where we normally would, and then the vehicles started then coming in. So we found ourselves in a very good spot right now, but there's no like staggering of those cars. They're out on the road, they're basically all a certain year. So we'll be able to squeeze next year with just 2 cars, but we expect the following year that we will then still need to get back to that 3. And the way things are going right now, we have we haven't even received 1 car yet from the beginning of this year. So it looks like that's gonna work out well for us to just be able to buy 2, and then that third one would fall back into line the following year.
And that's because we're doing a one-time records office storage renovation as a general fund operating transfer. So just for our board, next year that goes away. That doesn't stay there. That gets incorporated in the police cruisers line item. So we're all gonna forget this, so all 6 of us need to remember that.
What has been very beneficial so far is the conversion to the hybrid vehicles. So we're seeing a 30 to 50% reduction in our gas usage for those vehicles and for our engine or idle time. So our normal turnover period for our marked cruisers could end up being extended down the line. So we're just sort of hopeful that we'll see that in the near future.
Thank you.
And then this is just the graphing of where the funding is coming from. I'm gonna go to this page. And this is a conversation that we also gave to Amy to have with the Board of Finance on debt service capital, the payback, which is coming, which will be later tonight, I believe, and then we will learn where that goes and how that impacts our budget and our future, because we did have concerns about the debt service that we're having, what next year looked like as far as the CIP and how much was in there. And so that's going to be discussed and we'll get some guidance on where to go with that. So I'm not touching anything on this graph right now, just putting it up here, because we always put up this graph. And then again, the next steps, the public hearing is on April 3rd. Continuation, April 16th if needed, and then the referendum, right? So we are here to answer any questions that you guys might have.
Open it up to members of the board. I'll start with.
Oh, look, can I just, I'm pretty sure I thanked town staff, but I wanna do it again. Mark, Amy, Melissa, and Tom. And I also wanna thank our board, Curtis, Diana, Kevin, Heather, and Steve, and town staff for being here to support the budget with us.
You can stay right there. Art, would you like to start?
Sure, so the staffing changes, you mentioned the 4 roles, what's the base I should think of that on, like how many starting staff, is that like, I'm trying to understand what percentage increase is that to overall staff?
That's a good question. How many town hall staff, Mark?
I don't know the answer to that.
Full-time about 170.
170. We did look at staffing increases over the years. The town manager's office has been tracking that since about 2018 or 2017. 15. On occasion, it was as high as 6. Our ask was 4, as you see presented by the first selectman tonight. There were a couple of positions that didn't make it into the town manager's budget, and ultimately the board of selectmen approved those 4.
Got it. The question I had was, you mentioned I think we call it Main Street, we went from 50 to 100.
The Simsbury Main Street Partnership?
What are there specific plans for that? I mean, I like the idea, cause with grand list not growing, it seems like it's the type of thing that could help us from a revenue perspective, but are there specific plans to where that 50 to 100 goes?
Yeah, so right now we've been funding Simsbury Main Street Partnership. The executive director is Sarah Nielsen for multiple years at 50K. It's been flat funded. There's an MOU in place on what she's responsible for. We're hoping to enhance that a bit, potentially add some more responsibility criteria
Some
to that.
metrics,
Pardon me?
some performance metrics maybe?
Outcomes.
Performance metrics, yeah, sure. Well, we're trying to enhance that. We had an attempt last year. We included some fairly easy achievable items in the 50K because that's the funding that we've been doing over the years. But this year, because of the economic development, and if there's room for her to do grant funding, which she has done on some occasion in the town, she has good relationships with all the businesses in town. She finds homes for new people coming into town that wanna move around town. So we're hoping to partner up a little bit more this year.
Got it. I don't need to monopolize time, keep
There you
going, alright,
Yeah.
I'm on a roll, alright. On the PAC stuff, as I think about that, obviously PAC is a really important thing to Simsbury. We probably all take advantage of it in some capacity, but as we think about 2.7, 2.8 million, is there a revenue part of that we think is gonna add to revenue? Like, does that ever get paid back, or how do we think about that?
So a couple things. We have we have a contract in place, agreement with the Performing Arts Center right now. We are planning to update and upgrade that agreement to go back and review it. It needs to be revisited by June. There's been a lot of conversations among our board on where do we come into play? Is there revenue that could come to us? The new improvements to the PAC will offer additional meeting rooms. Is that stuff that will be available to the town to offset needs in the library? I think we have enough room in the library. I think we established that and elsewhere, but it will open up some additional space. So yes, we have raised that question. I don't have an answer on that, but it was raised and discussed.
Got it. Those are my main ones for now.
Art? Sure.
Yeah, I wanna start by reminding everybody that we had a tense meeting last month because of our dire predictions about tax increases, and this board asked the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen to come in to reduce their proposed budgets by certain amounts, and you guys came in under what we requested. So I don't wanna be moving the goalposts. But the objective was to get us down to a little under 5%, which is still a significant tax increase, and is gonna be followed by taxes further on. So glad and thankful for what you did. We don't need to be hypocritical, but we wanna look at this as closely as we can. And I'm sure you share our objective of reducing taxes as much as possible. So let me ask, at the quarterly report, we had projections that this year there would be savings on the town of, was it $900,000 from staffing vacancies?
1.6.
$1.6 million in staffing vacancies. Now, you've reduced the town manager's budget, or you added $100,000 to the projected vacancies, but how did you come to that $350,000 number?
I will defer to.
So we looked at the vacancy rate, it was $250 for the staffing. Back in July, I'm sure you remember that meeting, I had put together an analysis for you all on our revenue savings, our expenditure savings, and one of the areas that we never addressed was the benefit savings along with all the staffing savings. So we took a look at the positions that fingers crossed will be filled during the year, and then we took ones that might be not filled in accordance with the vacancy rate, and then we took a percentage of that for benefits. So we increased the vacancy rate $100,000 related to the benefit savings.
This number is, I'm sorry, it's because it's not a process I've ever been through, so you're looking at the current vacancy rate.
So we looked at vacancies over the last 3 budgets and where they came in, the average vacancies, and then we used the $250 to come up with that vacancy rate. And then I just looked at the analysis that I did for you all last July and noticed that we had a couple $100,000 in benefit savings associated with those vacancies, so we took $100,000.
So it isn't tied to specific offices or specific positions?
No.
And we're proposing to add 4 new positions now. You know, and again, for the public watching on television, let's appreciate that our town manager only started in January and has had a lot to do in addition to preparing this budget. But the interim town manager began a classification and compensation study that was going to, we hoped, give us ideas about significant savings in how we staff and organize the town office. And where are we in that project, and how does that relate to the decision to add 4 more offices?
I can take that one, Wendy. So the and I wanna thank GovHR, our contractor, and this board and the Board of Selectmen for authorizing that study. It's my view was it was overdue. We're really happy that's ongoing. I think we responded to one of the board's questions just today. We checked with GovHR, they're on track in terms of the timeline. It will be done sometime in May or June, but certainly by the end of the fiscal year. I think there may be a little bit of clarity needed around what the goals of the classification study are. It was, certainly you're looking for cost savings where you can find them, but it was a long overdue review of the job descriptions and the classifications of each of the positions, not about the individual, of course, but about the duties that they perform. So we anticipate that there's gonna be a whole body of work that grows out of this that involves help from the Personnel Subcommittee and the Board of Selectmen to update job descriptions and so forth. The savings will be minimal, I would say, vis-a-vis the increases that we've already agreed to contractually with our unions. But I do wanna emphasize that we're going into collective bargaining with essentially all our unions this summer. It's not a staggered approach here in Simsbury, it's all of them. So once we get through, very quickly after we get through the budget cycle, my office and staff will be involved in those negotiations, armed with that classification study. And so I think the point I'd like to make is that will hopefully help us in the negotiations, arm us with a good understanding of what our comparable communities are paying for similar positions. And I think that's where you get the savings. It's certainly no plan, and we've been asked by the unions to clarify for a couple of them, we're not making any cuts. But again, there is a cost savings to it when you factor in what are the out years in terms of those GWIs and step increases and so forth.
One last question I'd like to ask then, and it's more an opportunity for you to sell this budget for you guys, is we came into a big driver of the increases this year was one that we anticipated, which is the increase in debt service, which we're gonna try to deal with and all that, but it's something that we did anticipate, we knew it was coming. And so it was, and we talked about it last year at the budget, we talked about the need to prepare for it in this year's budget. And what I'd like you to present or explain is where we found savings within the town expenses that would offset that increase that was unavoidable.
You mean the increased debt service or
Yes.
the increase coming from the proposed 4 positions?
No, the increased debt service, how did you structure this budget around the need to deal with an adverse financial situation?
Thank you for the question. Certainly, as you know, my experience is in communities that have challenged budgets. And so I'm glad that I got here when I did. And I'm glad that I've had such wonderful help from the team in terms of getting to a town manager budget that then with the Board of Selectmen's help could get us to as I think one of your members mentioned, we hit the target in terms of the guidance that we had received from the Board of Finance relative to expense increases. I will just say that a good percentage of the tax increase that you're being asked to consider tonight was directly related to the Latimer project, right? And that is what drove a large increase in debt service. So it was well known to you, it was obviously supported by largely overwhelmingly by the community. But that debt service drops in the out years, as you know well. What we need to do is overcome this hump, temporary increase. And then hopefully tonight we'll hear and spend some time on what this board and your recommendations can be. And we've had some good conversations with our finance director about this. It was a challenge and it was a surprisingly difficult budget for us because we were also facing pretty significant staffing shortages, right? The records clerk, for example, that you see in the budget tonight, the ask, and supported by outside consultants and by the police commission, the ask was for 2. I went down there and looked at it, just as I went over to social services and looked at I looked at everything with detail. And the fact remained as we got further into the budget process, preparing for the Board of Selectmen's review, that the 4 positions that we put in were all absolutely critical. The HR issue I'll just touch on briefly is more of a restructuring of what really needed to be a department in its own right. All of the things that we mentioned in front of the Board of Selectmen that ultimately earned their unanimous support after much debate. It wasn't approved initially, but we had a vibrant conversation about this. Even going so far as to take a couple of members down to that office to show them firsthand the workload that is causing the challenges, right? So whether you go to the police department and you look in the records area, or whether you go to our personnel office and look at the backlog there, it became very clear to me that these were challenges that the organization couldn't wait to address a whole nother budget cycle, right? So if we didn't do it now, are we saying we're gonna defer it till next year? No guarantee of that. You've got compliance issues that are causing potential challenges that could have fiscal impacts to the town, certainly on the HR side. And as Wendy pointed out, the DPW position was funded just for half a year. The ask there was for a full, obviously. I mean, we worked hard. I hope that addresses the question. I think obviously debt service is a challenge that every community has got to face. I think from where I come, Simsbury's done a wonderful job at managing debt service. And we take everything that both boards are doing very seriously in that regard. Amy and the team have worked hard with all of us since I've been here. It's been a very busy 2 months, coming up on 3 months here. We presented a budget that was 7-point-something% tax increase, and I think the challenge from your board, which we took to heart, was make sure on the expense side you cut at least 580 or whatever that number was, and we cut over 700,000 with support from the Board of Selectmen to get us there. Where we really didn't want to move in that sort of give and take, as your chair described, the 3-legged stool, where we didn't want to give was in critically needed positions to operate and serve both your constituents, but also our internal stakeholders, which are all the employees.
Can I add something, Bert? Just this really about the positions. So I just wanna say one thing you said, our board didn't just look at 3.5 and say we were stopping. We were still going at that point. So we made the cuts, we revisited the positions, and I have to say our board was a tough audience on all the positions. I think we came to agree on the 4 because we got enough information. The need was proven by members of the staff and by the team, and that's how we ended up where we ended up. I also wanna mention the public works position was asked for last year and did not get funded, so regardless of the comp and classification study, that was an ask last year, and the previous board chose to fund another position over that one, because we actually took votes on it. The admin position, I think if you talk to Francine, Colleen, or Trish, they would tell you how much they need this staff support because it's cyclical. And if you talk to Colleen, there used to be a floater position, from what I understand, that helped these departments in critical times. They are customer facing, they are raising some revenue, they are bringing in permits. So I look at that as, I was on the fence for that one, to be honest with you, but that was, I think, the last one that made it over the hump in our conversation. And when we looked at the actual costs, I know there's feathers to the budget, but it was $1 per month tax increase, and we just looked at it as if it's that critical to help the staff in town hall, to help the customers coming into town hall, we decided to fund that one. And then the records clerk, it was again not really necessarily subject to the comp and classification study because that came out of the whole Certus study, the need there. And as a member of our board had mentioned, if you're gonna do studies, you have to kind of follow what the studies say. Otherwise, there's no reason to do studies because that's what you do a study. So I'm just kind of making that. And then the HR position, I'm not gonna call it anybody's thing, but this was on the radar last year when we did the GWIs and the salary discrepancies with our HR department and other departments, and I put it on Lee's radar, and it rose in Lee's radar to Mark's radar to restructure that department, to separate it from the town manager's office and make a true HR department for the staff. So it's hard to, it may not be justifiable to the public, but I think it's really justifiable in the organization and to the town. So I'm adding that.
Yeah, well, I did not mean to suggest that you weren't.
No, I know you, Bert.
And although we came into this process knowing we'd need to find savings, if I hear you correctly, it's, your judgment that in certain areas we were still being squeezed with the budgets we already started with, and that is a judgment for the Board of Selectmen and the town manager to make. But are there, can you identify any areas where we've reduced spending from last year's budget, or we found savings from last year's programs?
I will have to I don't think we did make any actual operating cuts other than what we proposed in the budget. There were some small places, I think, that we could have, but they were nominal. So we, as a whole, they were not brought to the table. Okay, I was gonna give you the
Just
example.
the paving and salt, which you had on the screen.
Yeah, one other one was the labor attorney, because Mark is more able to do the collective bargaining, and we had talked about that potentially being reduced, but it might have been a $10,000 reduction. So that's still probably an option to cut, but it wasn't substantial enough to make a difference.
Well, first of all, I thank you for this granular review. There's always a tension at the Board of Finance level about how granular we should get. We're concerned with the overall targets, and give you credit, we set a target for you and you met it. I welcome the kind of discussion we've had because you don't get to those targets without becoming granular, so respecting the decisions you've made, I'm glad you did come in doing what we asked you to do. I guess I would categorize my comments as Simsbury is still adjusting to the town manager form of government, frankly. We got off to a rocky start, we've had some interims, we have a new solution. And I believe that the new town manager should have the team and the structure that he or she needs to do the job. And I look at these 4 positions and say, all right, those are your priorities. We can't turn you loose to do the job and hold you responsible if we don't give you the players that you need. And so we're giving them to you. And I just would note that we also hired the town manager for his managerial acumen. And I think it would be foolish to come in and say, all right, where are you gonna get rid of things? How are you gonna cut expenses until you really know the town well? Now, this summer, you've got collective bargaining. I just urge you to do as best you possibly can. But that's kind of fixed. I mean, that comes in at a certain level. And beyond that, I hope that with this new team you have, you'll be able to look at structure, to look at specific positions, to look at how lean and efficient we can be as we go forward. It would be unrealistic and I think just not right to ask you to do that, having been here a couple of months. But I hope as you are here, we didn't get you from central casting. We got you because of your resume and the experiences you've had, and I hope you use all of that managerial talent to take a good fresh look where we can make economies, which does not come from collective bargaining. You'll do that the best you can, but it is gonna come from taking a fresh look at town government. I just urge you to bring your skill to bear on those problems as we go forward. The other thing I would just say is that it strikes me that we came in high this year, and this process that we engineered, the 3-legged stool that we've referred to, it seems that everybody's a little bit unhappy and everybody feels a little bit pained. And that's probably good for the town. I think everybody feels that they did not want to make these cuts. The revenue changes, the spending changes they've made, there's some pain in that. And so I say the system's working. I mean, and unfortunately, that's a sign that we're headed in the right direction. And I thank you for your role in helping us get there.
I was gonna ask one question, but I guess you're talking about this stool. I feel like
sitting device, right? Not
Yes.
not a medical.
there's in the whole process, yes, I mean, first of all, thank you for all the work that you've done to get, to the numbers that you've gotten to. I know it's not easy trying to make the decisions and to what other folks have said, with all of the different boards and teams that are looking, everybody's trying to find a way to make the economic realities something that people can live with. The 4th leg of the stool is the community. Really, we hear from people who come up here. We'll hear from people at the public audience, but also an important part of the whole thing. So I just feel like gotta recognize that. That wasn't what I was planning to say as we move down the row, but a question on Memorial Pool. I'm sure the answer is somewhere in the budget book, and I apologize if I missed it. But we've got some money in here for the redesign, anticipating that this could turn into a splash pad or something like that. I feel like I've read something at some point that if we didn't, we have to do something to that pool anyways. There's repairs needed. If we didn't do a redesign, how much would it cost to get it back to where we wanted it to be?
To be a pool or to be a nothing?
To be a pool or to be a nothing, I guess.
Yeah, Tom had the
There's
numbers.
costs associated with either.
Yeah.
It would be $2 to $3 million to rebuild that pool as the
2 to 3 to rebuild it to kind of like
To be a pool.
today's version of a
to be a pool, right? I mean, what as far as like the expected lifespan of where it is now, we could fill the pool with water next June
Right.
and come in the second week in July. The shell is large chunks of the shell have collapsed in.
Right.
We're not gonna pay that. It doesn't make sense to fix that at that point. That's why we're trying to push we were trying to push to make this decision sooner, so we don't get to that point where we've lost half the summer swimming for the day camp that's there, that's based out of there. That's the largest revenue generator for the town rec programs outside of golf. But the splash pad was the highest priority in the master plan we did in 2012, highest facility part of the master plan priority. I think it's gonna be a popular amenity. We can run that more efficiently than we can run a pool right now with 7 lifeguards versus 1 staff. More likely, utilities cost will be less than what it is now. And if we have the added benefit of that bathhouse being renovated, it can be also potentially used for public restrooms for the sports events that take place up there in the spring, summer, and fall. And with those groups sharing in the cost of the maintenance of those bathrooms.
And to build it would be less than rebuilding the pool.
Correct, yeah, I mean, you're gonna see the initial cost will be there's gonna be demo of the pool, obviously, some renovation of the bathhouse, it needs a new roof right off the bat before you do any other work inside, but that might be a quarter of the budget, and then the splash pad is the remainder of the budget.
I hate to ask this, but just to finish up if you just pave the whole thing over and like what would that cost?
I don't know, Tom, you're the paving expert.
I don't need an exact number, but it's like
$25,000.
Okay.
I mean, you're demolishing and fill at that point.
And you're getting nothing back for the community for that. Okay, that's helpful. And thank you for all the explanation of everything as you went through. Help me understand stuff. Thanks a lot.
So who does the HR leadership stuff now that this new role is going to do in the future?
So we have one incumbent, essentially a personnel coordinator. The incumbent is, and as Wendy mentioned,
That's the generalist, that would be that
No.
position that's in here?
no,
Now?
we don't have a generalist at the moment. So the current situation is one incumbent, a personnel coordinator, no generalist. He is supported, the position is supported by administrative staff, including the deputy town manager. So some of the administrative work that needs to be done to support the personnel HR function is being done by the deputy town manager, and obviously a higher rate of pay. And my office is providing the support that it has to support. But the proposal is one new employee, that's the generalist, to handle most of the administrative support work, if not all of it. And then there's a promotion piece that creates the director, department head. It's essentially a position exchange. So you're restructuring one FTE into two. It's a slight promotion and pay increase to create the director and the department head. And then you're adding one full-time employee to support the entire personnel function for the town. Currently, it's done by one person with some help from my office.
So I actually had some fun trying to get to, can our townsfolk continue to be able to afford the increases that we're forecasting for this year and for the foreseeable future. And I got back to data in our budgets that are on our website back to 2010 and from ctdata.org. And unfortunately, all the data that was available on median income from ctdata.org, the most recent data that was usable was from 2020. And amazingly, the increase in amount in our budgets in that timeframe from 2010 to 2020 was 14.96%. And the average median income increase between 2010 and 2020 was 14.397. So the bummer with that is, what I'm worried about is our budgets seem to be going in this direction, and I worry that median income in current data is flat. And I realize that everybody did the best they could this year to keep those increases to the minimums that they could, but is this sustainable going forward, right? So I I ask that everybody continue to do what they can and with a strong eye to the future that what we're doing most likely in this year's budget is not sustainable for the future. And I hope to find other data that proves that out.
I'll circle in with a few questions. First of all, Wendy, thank you and to your board for coming in below what we asked. It's still above the 175, but below the secondary after we saw the needs. So I do wanna recognize that, and I think Todd did an analysis with Amy that savings actually enabled us to hit our overall targets. I wanna thank Todd for that analysis and Amy working on that.
I asked the question, Amy did the analysis.
So the savings you provided, the Board of Ed, we asked to come in at 4.3, they came in at 4.1, your savings covers that without having them to make additional cuts in staffing at the schools, so thank you for that. And I do wanna recognize the work of the staff that worked with Mark, who got this where we are. I do have just a few questions. One, I did ask Mark, are these the top priorities of staffing? Cause next year is gonna be a tight budget, so there might not be as much flexibility on staffing next year. And we already know that we're gonna have 200,000 from the volunteer ambulance that is like staffing, that's gonna go in the operating budget. And we know we have half a mechanic position going in. So that pretty much covers any new positions next year. So I just wanna say that, when you think, are you adding a new position? You're adding 2.5 already right off the bat. So that doesn't leave a lot of room for other positions in my mind, but of course we'll hear what you guys have to say. Then I'm just following up on the total when the salaries and compensation thing our board had requested as part of that, that'd be a total compensation, so you're looking at all benefits, not just salaries.
Correct.
Okay, perfect, cause Simsbury has been known for giving great benefits and slightly lower salary.
You'll be proud to know, Madam Chair, that in front of the Board of Selectmen soon will be a proposal to reduce the pension multiplier for new hires that are unaffiliated, so just an idea of what's coming down the pike, but yes, as part
Not
of this.
happy, but we wanna offer fair compensation.
Relative to our peers,
Right,
absolutely, so we are
exactly.
working on that.
Thank you, appreciate that. Then in terms of just going to the HR, when we get this new position, what metrics are you gonna look at and what does success look like in that department?
So as we mentioned from the top, and Wendy, do you wanna take this or?
I'll let you take it.
Okay, so I think the Board of Selectmen, the prior board, I think Wendy was a part of this, put in some budget for things like employee satisfaction surveys and other things to measure how are we serving our, as I call them, our internal stakeholders, right? Are we being responsive to the needs of our employees? My understanding is that funding didn't actually get all the way through the budget cycle last year or the year before. But I think one of the measurements of success is gonna be increasing the timeliness of all of our reporting, increasing the timeliness and responsiveness of the HR function to all of our employees. I think, it's also, I know from my own experience in HR previously, it's an area of local government that has expanded over the years, be it because of state mandates or COVID or whatever you wanna call it. So I think the key metric is gonna be the responsiveness, the timeliness. It is not a revenue producing position, obviously, as we all know, so we're not gonna be tracking the success there. But we are gonna look to GovHR to give us guidance in this area. They know that we're seeking board approval for this position. It's good to have them on the team as we're proposing this. As Wendy indicated, the Board of Selectmen and the Personnel Subcommittee particularly will be involved in approving those job descriptions and making sure that the duties of the roles, both the HR director and the generalist, are what they need to be. And then we'll work out performance metrics for them. I think, as your new town manager, and I appreciate the earlier comments, we will always be looking for savings. But I also am not a data geek, but I wanna make and recommend data-driven decisions for our boards and for our leaders. And I'm not making any criticisms, but we need more data, we need more actionable data. not just for my internal management of the organization, but for our policymakers, you know. Where is the data being, you know, provided at, where are we getting it from that drives the decisions, I think, as Michael mentioned. So unfortunately, it's not as easy as just tracking the tax collector, you know, at what our collection rate is, but we certainly wanna look for the metrics. The generalist, I think, will be pretty easy to justify because the boxes of backlog will be gone, and when we walk in there and you know, you get this sense of less tension. It is a very taxing position. You know, I wanna thank the staff that's been doing it. You're really one individual has stepped up, and it is largely, I will say, editorialized that, you know, he is in some respects his own worst enemy, because you know, the better your employees are and the more they're willing to burn themselves out without complaint, and we've got a number of them on our staff, you see them every day. It does fall to Wendy and I and the Board of Selectmen to advocate for them, so thank you for your support, particularly of the 4 positions. It means a great deal to me and a great deal to the staff. We're very appreciative, understanding that the tax increase is still higher than it needs to be.
Can I have a comment?
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on the HR space. Coming from corporate, like a lot of us have worked in the corporate, your HR was always a separate entity. It was not tied into the leadership office in your department or building. So I think that enhances that function by moving it elsewhere where it's a safe space for employees to go to discuss retirements, salaries, whatever there is. The other thing I wanted to comment is we have Mark on tape saying that he's pretty much going to hold himself to not any new positions next year. So I wanna point that out.
I was hoping she'd forget that, no,
So that was one other thing, and I think it's on us, our board, which to date has been really collaborative, both amongst ourselves and with the Mark and the town staff, to make sure that we keep Mark accountable for these improvements to town hall and to what's gonna happen here and make sure that it happens.
So I only have one more question, as you thankfully answered many of them in advance, so I appreciate that. And this is related to an old issue, but you may not be familiar with it. Henry James is still awaiting middle school, their audit, and there's $2,000 sitting there that we 2 million that we cannot use. That is, as soon as we get the okay, we can use. So I know it's been hard to get through to them. Anything, Wendy, you can work perhaps with Melissa and Lisa Seminara and staff to get that released. That would be a help if we could get that.
Right.
Did I summarize that accurately?
You did, we are working with the state of Connecticut on getting that closed out. We actually did receive one payment, but we are still waiting for the remainder. So fingers crossed.
Do we feel like we need more push, or is that well in hand?
We push as hard as we can, and probably every 5th email we get a response, so we're just gonna keep going with that. Maybe by the end of the year, we'll have the rest of our
I would
funding.
say that if we could keep that on everyone's radar, because we do have a roof need in Henry James, and that would cover that. As we're gonna talk about the capital crunch. I will go back for last questions if people have it, but just for members of the public, after we get the last questions, we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we're gonna go in and do some modeling. Our board had the opportunity to work with Melissa and Amy last week, and really it was so in-depth on different financing mechanisms and timing mechanisms. And we do anticipate giving some guidance on future capital CIP plans to get us to where we need to go. So we're gonna have Amy walk through it. It is a little intense and dense, but it's
You won't wanna miss it.
It's not, it's fun.
It's great, it's really exciting, but it is significant because it really sets the path, to Mike's point. How are we gonna create a sustainable community, and what do we need to do, and how do we plan in the long term for some of the bigger needs that we're gonna have? So we'll go through sort of what we reviewed, we'll solidify that that's where our board is, and then we'll give some preliminary guidance to take back to you at that point. But let me open it up for last questions before we take a break. Are there any?
Yeah, I wanted to clear something, I forgot to ask about the splash pad, but it's $150,000 for design.
Yes.
So we heard that restoring the pool would be $2 to $3 million. Do we have a sense of what the splash pad would cost?
Yes, we do. So that $150,000, Bert, it's not only for the design of the splash pad, but for the evaluation of the current bathhouse to see what can be reused in there and how it can be reconfigured to be adequately accessible to use it for the splash pad, the mechanicals for the splash pad, and the public use of the restrooms in there, the changing rooms. So it's for both. It's design of the splash pad and the reconfiguration of the building. Splash pad we think would probably be about $950,000-ish. You know, costs are going up annually, but this project would give us a firmer number to come back with next year. And then, you know, the decision can be made, you know, I'm hoping to get an option A and an option B, but let the Board of Selectmen evaluate that project for what it is next year. You know, we'll go through a year of design with public input included, staff input included. But other similar sized projects are in that neighborhood right now. Farmington is doing one that's gonna be a little bit smaller for about, I think it's $565 is their cost, and they got some a steep grant toward that cost. Canton's was a little bit lighter, but it's a smaller project adjacent to an existing pool. But other towns are, you know, we're not far off on that. I mean, we're talking a lot of work that needs, you know, to be done up there.
Yeah, but we're talking about $150,000 appropriation this year in anticipation of a significantly larger one next year.
Correct, that the Board of Selectmen is hoping that will, you know, half of that might come from grant money.
Right, okay, that was my question.
Just follow up, is there any plans to try and raise money for this?
From local donations. I know I don't wanna speak for them, but there has been a family who is looking to make a memorial donation to a project similar to this. It's not, you know, to the extent where it's gonna cover the other half of that money. So, you know, that's where that is. I do think there's some offsetting revenue that's gonna come in that we're not bringing in from the pool right now. Again, it's gonna be an overtime thing to get that money back. You know, there's a chance, again, we talked about the last meeting about renting for field trips for field days and things like that. Again, not a ton of money, but we also have the ability to expand that season with a splash pad. So instead of going from, you know, what we go from the third week in June now to the second week in August, potentially because of the less staff that's needed and we don't have to put lifeguards there, we could reasonably expect that we could open Memorial Day and keep it open through Labor Day and bringing in additional revenue that way.
And I remember from the budget workshop, the day camp goes there.
Correct.
But the day camp, I don't know, what ages are covered by the day camp?
It's kids entering kids entering first grade through sixth grade. This year we have 110 kids there at that camp with a waiting list of up to 40 kids right now in some of those weeks. For 6 weeks and for 4 weeks, and then with the Board of Ed kids who come to use the program as well, we'll have 120 kids for 4 additional weeks.
Would like fifth and sixth graders still be using the splash pad?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, that's not we don't get as many fifth and sixth graders at that program as we do second, third, and fourth graders. That's kind of the sweet spot for that. We've begun the adventure camp again this year, which is geared more towards sixth, seventh, and eighth graders. So we think those kids will end up over there, which creates additional spots for younger kids. You know, sixth graders who don't have a younger sibling in camp won't have to go to stuff to do. They'll go over to the adventure camp. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's no problem. I could talk about that stuff all day. So.
Any other questions? We'll take a 5-minute break and then repeat. We're gonna go ahead and reconvene our meeting.
I'll put you on the agenda for first, and that'll be at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, it's
Okay, to SCTV, we're gonna go ahead and start. What we're gonna do now is go through some of the modeling.
May I interrupt for a moment?
Okay.
During the break, one of the members of the Board of Selectmen made a point to me about the splash pad, which I think is worth hearing. So if Diana would just share it.
Sure. I had just mentioned that in that $150,000 that goes towards the design, one of the really important things that we discussed that came to our attention was in order for us to apply for grants they need those designs and need to understand how much it was gonna cost in order for us to apply for those grants. So that was one of the big bases for us approving the $150,000 is so that we can then apply for the grants for whatever project we're gonna move forward to. And we had asked for multiple designs, not just here's a one, shot. We had asked for when we do get the designs that we have kind of option A, B, and C to look at.
Thank you.
Thank you. So what we'll do is we'll go through some of the modeling that our board met last Thursday in the engineering room, which is the best room in all of town hall, to go through different modelings of what we could do, not only to address the current year, but because we're the Board of Finance, we always take a 5-year look out and look at projections and look, we have some information that is known and some information that is estimated. And we asked Amy to use conservative estimates. We asked her to give us proposals that one would not compromise our AAA bond rating, that would not create cliffs that we couldn't address in the future, and that we're in compliance with our current policy. And the reason why we asked that is all those are essential in maintaining the AAA bond rating for the town, and maintaining the AAA bond rating is important because it lowers our borrowing costs, so it is a cost saver. So what Amy did is walked us through 3 scenarios. If there is no objection, we're gonna have Amy walk through the 2 that the board was comfortable with. There was one that the board felt it was not worth further consideration, so I asked her to walk through the 2. We may end up in the hybrid and actually do a little bit of both. Amy was checking with our bond counsel and we may need
I got an answer on that, I adjusted scenarios.
Is it a good answer?
It's a good answer.
Okay, so then we will be doing a hybrid plan. So Amy, why don't you sort of make that a lot bigger?
I will, I didn't wanna give away the surprise because everybody's just gonna wanna see the number.
And why don't we start with where we are and then the problems our board was seeing and has been discussing, and then we'll talk about the alternatives. Why don't you walk us through 1 and 2 as your preference?
Okay, so. That's good. Alright. So like Lisa mentioned, I had our bond advisor look through 4 different scenarios for how we can restructure our debt and take a look at the Latimer Lane impact that's coming up. He provided 4 different scenarios. One scenario was outside of Board of Finance guidance, so I threw that one out. I prepared 3 different scenarios. Like Lisa said, we went through those last Thursday, and these were the top 2 that made it for presentation for looking at not only the current year budget, but out year budgets as well.
Amy, do you have a start in 2025 that shows debt service at 8.9, which is where we are?
Yep. So we took the Board of Selectmen budget, we took the Board of Education budget, the approved budgets, and then as you know, this is our 8.9% debt service. Down in the revenues, we did increase, and one other change I think too on the Board of Selectmen is reducing the 60,000 for the CNR payback, which we'll talk about. And then down here, we increased the investment income as proposed. So that's kind of your base starting point for each of these scenarios.
Amy, that assumes the 500 that the first selectman recommended.
Correct. Yep, the investment income bump. Yep.
What's the 5.29? What is that number?
That's your budget increase from 24 to 25.
But not the tax increase. What is the tax increase is below that,
Okay.
which is?
So your tax increase is 5.78 with those adjustments. So
How does that match with what the first selectman just said? Cause I thought she was over 6.
she was 6.04, but then I reduced it another 60,000 for the CNR, and I
You're comfortable that you can connect those 2? Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then looking at the out years, I was pretty conservative for the operating budgets. I did a 4% increase for the Board of Selectmen, a 4% increase for the Board of Education. Given those increases are not typically that high, I was pretty comfortable using the 4% in this year and the out years as almost like a worst case scenario type thing. Building in a little bit of cushion as to where our starting point year over year would be. So this is our first scenario with our debt. Oh, and then the out years too, I just wanted to make note that I made adjustments for the motor vehicle tax increase. So any year that we are going to be above 32.46 in the mill rate, we will get reimbursed from the state of Connecticut. So in fiscal year 26, the proposed mill rate will calculate vehicle taxes at about 10 million. But unfortunately, we can only use a mill rate of 32.46 for the motor vehicle. So the difference between the two is 432,000. That will be reimbursed to us in fiscal year 27 because they reimburse a year behind. So I added that 432,000 to the fiscal year 27 calculation. So that's how we were able to bump up our revenues in these out years. Okay, now onto the debt. So our first option for our debt is,
But Amy, even before you get that, can you go back and show what the debt projections are before we do the options? Because this is the problem we're trying to solve.
the original ones.
Like close, no, just where you were, that's good enough.
Oh,
Just slide back over.
those are with my updated numbers. Hold on.
See 8-9 to 9-2, oh, that was 10, right?
I'll delete it. Okay. So, that is great.
Those
The original.
next year was supposed to be 1.3 million higher, it's okay.
Okay.
What we were trying to solve for is not only this year, but next year there was a huge increase in debt service. So we were trying to solve this year and next year.
Right, okay. So typically AAA bond rated communities and us in the past, we have never taken what's called a bond premium. So we would use our premium to lower our debt. So essentially when we issue bonds, we're issuing it at 4 or 5%, but we're not actually paying 4 or 5%. We're paying say 3.5%. So the difference between those percentages we get back. And the calculation that our bond advisor gave us essentially says we'll probably get a premium on this issuance of about $1 million. Like I said, we don't normally take this money in-house. We normally reduce our bonding, which reduces our debt in the out years. But just as a way to get some relief in the next couple of years related to the Latimer issuance, we are contemplating taking that premium in-house and using it over the course of 2 years to reduce that debt service. So in fiscal year 25, we would use about 700,000. And then in fiscal year 26, we'd be using that remaining 300,000 of debt service. So then you can see down here that your new tax impact is 5.09% increase in taxes. And then in your out years, you're 4.66, 3.75. So you're managing those out years by essentially putting that premium towards your biggest jumps in debt service to try to kind of smooth it over the next few years. And then in this scenario, you get to fiscal year 26, you're using the last 300,000, and then in fiscal year 27, you're kind of back at that 9.2, 9.1.
So Amy, that scenario is, I think, a little different when we looked at it. That's the 8.2 and it goes to 9.2, that's still $1 million jump for next year's budget, right?
So this is the scenario, this isn't the number 2, so this is the first scenario where you don't have, or you have more flexibility with your reserves, but you're playing with it year over year. So this scenario 2, you have more of a plan for stabilization. So
So before you move on, so a disadvantage of this is you still have a big debt increase next year.
right, okay. However, to get to the next part of this is our proposed reserves. So based on the Board of Finance guidance where we typically are at year end, we'll have general fund balance at 16%. We're anticipated to be at 18.6% at the end of this fiscal year on a conservative basis of what we expect our savings to come in at. So the difference between that 18% and that 16%, we essentially have 3.2 million that we can use out of our general fund by staying within our policies and move over to our capital reserve. So typically what would happen is we would take that 3.2 million, we'd recommend to use it in, or recommend to transfer it into our capital reserve fund. This year is a little bit different and the Board of Finance might make some tweaks along the way, but this is what I presented last Thursday, is taking the $650,000 in health insurance reserves that the Board of Education used, the $200,000 in health insurance reserves that the town used, and we essentially are holding over $850,000 to fund any potential cliffs that may be feathered in the out years.
Amy,
So-
can you pause that and explain that use of health reserves in this budget?
So we have 20 to 25% of expected claims in our health insurance fund is where we're supposed to be as far as health insurance fund reserves. Anything above and beyond that technically is at the discretion of the Board of Finance as to whether they'll allow us to use those funds. So when we're using those health insurance funds, say the $850,000 in total, we're reducing our operating budget and essentially creating a cliff for next year. So what we're doing here is we're taking some of our year-end savings and we're putting that aside so that we can feather in any cliff. And we're using this as an assignment because we don't know if there's gonna be a cliff. There could be a cliff and we're gonna plan for that cliff. But on the Board of Education side, for example, they're using $650,000 in reserves. So next year, theoretically, they would have a $650,000 cliff in their health insurance line item. However, with our special education challenges, there are many meetings being set up post-budget to start looking at our transportation, our out-of-district, things that we can really start to get down, those budget creative things we can do, working with a consultant, things of that nature. So we are hoping to capture some of those savings during the year. If we are able to capture those savings during the year, we will reallocate those dollars to the health insurance, and therefore we're minimizing the cliff or getting rid of the cliff depending on how much we can reallocate. But like I said, we put the full $850,000 in here to plan for a worst case scenario.
Amy, and just before we go on, in December, our board said we would only use 1/3 above 25%. This is using more than that. And I just wanna make the board aware of that. That is a change from what we did and that should be something we need to consider. But to Amy's point, she is planning for that cliff. So it's not using it without preparation for a cliff remediation.
Which was the purpose of the 1/3 as well, is
Yes.
that, right, so
It's
it's so as
precisely-
long as we're aware of it, right?
Precisely.
And then down here, this $1 million, so my original proposal was to give an additional $1 million for CNR and pay it back over 5 years. The Board of Finance has a preference to take this out of reserves as opposed to using the payback methodology, so that's what that $1 million is. And then this was the Board of Selectmen change for the parks pension where we're taking out a year-end savings as opposed to in the operating budget. So this gets you from your 3.2 million down to about 1.2 million, and then this can be transferred over into your capital reserve fund. So right here is your 1.29. So if we look at our capital reserve fund, we're at 3.8 million unassigned available to use. Under the town manager proposed budget, not the Board of Selectmen, you have capital funding of about $500,000, CNR funding about $650,000, and then we added the ambulance of about $200,000. And then you take your 1.2 million from your general fund, and now you have total available reserves of about 3.6 million. So now what happens is in these out years, you go year over year, you have 3.6 million, you can offset debt service, you can take a look at any of your capital needs, you can reduce your bonding, you can you're basically saying like a year over year, you're gonna look at your reserves, you're gonna look at what's coming down the pike, and then you're gonna reallocate accordingly. Another thing I forgot to mention is our capital projects, because all of these are built into the debt assumptions. So for our capital projects, I looked at where we've bonded the last few years, and our bonding has typically been around 5 million. So if I take our capital plan and I limit it to 5 million in the out years, so essentially we bond every other year, so you have $10 million available between 2 budget years. So you can use 7 million one year, 3 million the other year. As long as you're using that 10 million every 2 years, you can allocate however you like. So this limits the amount of debt service that we have each year to the $5 million. Another thing it does is that in these out years, since we're already at a better starting point and we're essentially managing, because look at this. So you're managing 4%, 4%, 4%, 4% essentially. Well, what was your operating increase? 4%, 4%, 4%, 4%. So now you're managing more of your operating budget than you are your debt service. And if we get lucky on revenues, great. So we have the ability, or hoping we have the ability in these future years to increase our CNR. So if we're increasing our CNR using the operating budget, then hopefully we'll get to that $1 million over the payback period, a traditional payback where we're adding to it every year, and then we have that $1 million baked into the budget like we do our 416,250. So if that happens, we're managing our CNR, we're not starving our capital, and then we still have sufficient reserves to do what we need to do in the future. And those are all decisions that can be made year over year, knowing that we have these reserves available. The only thing that we don't know, obviously, is where our grand list is gonna come in, if we're gonna have expenditure challenges. But this gives you the tools you need to maneuver if you so choose.
And Amy, one of the things we are looking at projection for grand list is actually the highest next year over the last 5 years, so that's not high, but a 0.83. So that will help feather in that big debt service increase. But the bottom line is, and I'll just scream it from the rooftops, next year is a very hard budget year. Very hard, and cause you're starting at $1 million deficit, we were gonna start at 1.3, it's down to 1 million with the debt service increase. So this is solving a long-term problem. Next year, just as hard, next year harder because we're gonna hit the municipal cap levels. So just I say that like at every meeting we need to say that. Okay, what else can we do?
So that's scenario 1. So now for scenario 2. The same basic principles that I took you through during the first one as far as increasing the revenues based on the motor vehicles. We're still at our debt service capacity of the 5 million. We're still trying to look at out years and building in a CNR. But for this one, we move our issuance. Typically we do our issuance in spring, so anywhere from April, May. This time we're gonna do our debt issuance on July 1st. If we push off our debt issuance, then we're only paying $290,000 in fiscal year 25 for our Latimer issuance. So we're essentially pushing off that debt impact. And then for
Amy, before you even go there, look at the difference between 2025 and 2026. Suddenly there's not the huge peak.
True story. Alright, so anyways, we go to our new debt service number, which is slightly over $8 million, and then if we look at our tax increase below, you're at 4.93. So now, we're gonna look at our out years. And in our out years, we are still able to take in that $1 million bond. So we have a bond premium coming in on our debt issuance that we can put aside. And then I took about 1.3 million of our capital reserves to offset our debt in the out years. So for this year, we're just delaying our debt and fiscal year.
This is the new hybrid.
In fiscal year 26, I took $1 million of that bond premium, and then I took $300,000 from capital reserve. And then like Lisa pointed out, you have this nice smooth increase into fiscal year 26. Again, in fiscal year 27, I took about $700,000 out of capital reserve. Again, nice smooth increase, and then the same thing for fiscal year 28, only utilizing about $300,000 in capital reserve. Now when you get to fiscal year 29, we're done having to smooth. We're right where we need to be. We can start rebuilding our cash for capital. We can start relooking at our debt plan. All we did was take some of our reserves and our bond premium to smooth this up each year so that we're not worrying about our debt increase year to year, and we're able to focus more on our operating budgets. So again, here you're going from a 4%, 4%, 4%. Well, what was my assumption in the beginning? 4%, 4%, 4%. So then you get down here and you have a much more manageable starting point. So this tax increase is essentially your starting point against your operating budgets and it's no longer impacted by those huge swings from your debt service year over year. So the other thing I wanted to show you is what it does to our reserves.
That's where I was headed.
So we have the same situation for the general fund. We're still at 1.2 million being transferred into the capital reserve fund. We're still at our 3.8 million. Under this scenario, again, we're still at the town manager's proposed budget because we need those reserves. We have the ambulance in there that have that 1.9, and then you have that 3.6 that you were looking at in the previous scenario. So now we have the debt service coming out for fiscal year 26, fiscal year 27, and fiscal year 28. This still leaves you 2.3 million in reserves to use for unanticipated projects, project overages, reallocating from year to year. And again, this is in the hopes that over those next 4 years, hopefully sooner, we're still building up our CNR to get to a point where we have the 5 million a year in bonding, then we start to build up. So we're maintaining our CIP and our capital. Could we do more? Of course. But it's a good starting point. And then for our CNR, we're still trying to build up in those good years by building in that traditional 5-year payback. And then you don't need 2.3 million, you don't need 3 million in your capital reserves because we're already maintaining everything on a schedule, and this truly is a reserve for emergencies, project overages, nice to haves, things of that nature.
Or it could also be just a dedicated funding source for additional, not having to bond, if we wanna get bonding lower.
Yep, we could reduce our bonding, we could use it for wherever we wanted to. Cause we're at a point where we're maintaining our assets in accordance with our plans, our schedules, and the needed funding. That's all I got.
Questions? First question is, bond counsel and bond advisor, no credit risk at all in doing this. What risks should the board
Policy.
be aware of? It's just the use of reserves. It requires us to be disciplined, have a plan, cause we're gonna use reserves over the next 3 years, and that means it's not there to, oh hooray, we've got a huge amount of dollars.
Exactly, so that will be assigned and will no longer be for use unless you make changes.
Unless we release the assignment.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's one thing that we'll do. An assignment is an intent for the public, is an intent to spend money, it's not an appropriation. So once you will spend it, we still have to appropriate it, but it signals to staff and the public and the world that we're not gonna spend it, cause we have a plan for it.
There's gotta be a cost to taking the premium though, right?
We're just paying higher debt service in the out years.
There's a cost.
But since it starts to fall off, the stuff that comes on, it stays flat.
Does it take longer? Like,
Same term.
Nope, we're essentially, so that difference in the premium, like we're bonding at 5%, but our true interest cost is 4%, that difference, we're gonna actually pay the 5%.
And Amy, the pushing out of the bond issuance part, is there any risk in that, or is that just lining things up
Just
a little
timing.
bit better and not having a period where we're paying interest we don't really need to?
Exactly. Yep, just timing.
And because we have such healthy reserves, not overly, but in line with the recommendation of our rating agencies and things, we have the ability to float the money
Right.
to delay the couple months to do the project. That's part of the reason you do that. For people who wonder about our reserves, they think, 16%, that's too much. It's 2 months. Think about your own emergency reserves. They recommend 6 months, we have two. It's not, when you think of it that way, it's not that crazy a number. But that's part of the reason we do that, and also because of cash flow, because we collect taxes in December and July, so the combination of that. What questions do board members have?
Can
Wendy?
you just go to the bottom and look at the tax?
It's not great.
Right, I mean, it's still, I mean,
Well, Amy, change it to 3% on the operating budgets above, and what do we get?
Better number.
Now
So
we're
now you're starting at 2.
at the rate of inflation, 2.7.
well, for one, yeah.
Well, you have to go down the line.
And
mind-blowing thing for me is it took us till 2020 to get to 100 million. In 10 years, we're halfway to 200 million. That blows my mind.
Well, we don't have to be, cause remember there was a time when we used to do no budget increases or 0.5%, and we may get to that point again. Because as we start to look at our mill rate in comparison with other towns, we're high. And we can't be that far out of range with our peers. So that gets us down in the 2.731s. So, sort of red flag, we're looking at budget increases of 3% next year. Maybe lower in the out years, depending on what happens. So now's the time to plan for that and think about it, and to Art's suggestion with Mark to find those efficiencies. What can we do more with less? How are we gonna be creative or grow that grand list? If the grand list comes in strong, we have some flexibility. If the grand list remains what we're projecting, we're in deep trouble. Not deep trouble, but
Chair,
challenging.
could we just, if you don't mind, back me up on the motor vehicle where you added the revenue back in? Was that because the mill rate went up?
Yes, so the mill rate is over the
Over the cap.
32.46.
And how much did you put in for the revenue in that out year? Or
Depends on the
the
year.
differs
reimbursement?
each year because it's a year lag.
It changes,
It's a year lag. We get a year behind.
I got you.
Yeah.
And the risk of that is what? That we're getting reimbursed by the state, and at some point they could say that they're not going to do that?
Oh, for sure. Right.
Just to be clear, yep.
Yes, that's a risk for sure.
Oh, yes.
And I think the other thing though, just to underscore your point, Lisa, it feels like this year, this is my first time going through this process, but it feels like we started with like bottoms up, people coming to us with budgets and then sort of peeling back from that, and it sort of feels really painful, I feel like, when you do it that way. I'm frankly not used to doing it that way, I'm used to doing it the opposite way, and it feels like to your 3% number, if we're really gonna be serious about this next year, we gotta start with everybody hitting 3. Right, so that we don't start with 6 and then peel ourselves back to 4 and feel like we did something good, so we are where we are, but it just feels like that's
In fairness, we did start at 175, but yeah. I mean, the problem with, I think, public budgeting as opposed to private budgeting is it's really what our residents wanna pay. I always say, are you willing to pay higher taxes? And I get regularly, it depends on what it's for. If it's going to the teachers, yes, I am. If it's for going towards trips for staff, no, I'm not. If it's going for,
understood.
yeah, so
But we're talking about on the heels of last year's
I
significant
agree.
increase, and this year we're gonna be CPI plus a decent amount, so I get the point, but I just think we can't forget this and then go to the budget next year and then get surprised, that's
I
all.
think we can scream it from the rooftops, we need you to come in 3% or lower budget. Wendy's been waiting.
So here's a question that's been bothering me. So the debt service is a result of what we've bonded for in prior
What we've
years,
approved,
right? What we've approved. So I'm just trying to tie this back to what do our projects look like in the next few years that we're gonna approve to bond this, and that's, we haven't talked about that, like numbers wise, great, but what are we gonna be able to do? And that's the question.
So that will be our next, and I hope by unanimous consent that we will turn it back to your board and Mark and say, show us a CIP where you're only bonding 5 million a year. And you have to figure that out. How-
Board of Ed too.
Yeah, with the Board of Ed.
Now, okay, that's what I was waiting for somebody to say. What could just throw all this off balance completely is a new bond issuance for a new school that came in earlier than we saw, and then this is good work, but I mean, that's what could throw it off track.
Well, part of Amy's plan though, as the budgets go up, our debt service, I mean, the key, 2 pieces of discipline, we have to use the reserves as we plan and not touch that for other things. But the other thing is as debt service falls down, we need to keep that debt service payment flat. And the reason why we need to do that is we fill it in with cash, debt service is going down, cash, same amount, 9 million, 9 million, 9 million. As this keeps going down, you got more capacity. When we have the big problem, we now have capacity to bond without crashing the mill rate. Still might be a bump in the mill rate, but it will help mitigate the mill rate. So that's why we're doing this. It's really a 10-year plan to get us ready for that big project that's coming down the line. Will it totally fix the cost of it? No, but it will help us be able to absorb it less. Oh my gosh, this is insane. So, but it's gonna require our discipline on our part not to do a tax holiday when that debt service falls down. We're gonna have to keep that steady at 9 million if we're gonna do squadron or senior center or whatever those are. next big project. But that's part of how we'll plan for that, which is why I think first of all, I wanna congratulate Amy, cause one, figuring it out, but two, explaining it.
That's why we did a separate meeting. We'd only be on scenario 2 right now.
Right, it did, I mean, you folks watching should know, we did spend about 2.5 hours on this, so this is our second. And we know there's a lot of numbers for the public to absorb, but the key thing there is within our policies to not risk our debt, our AAA bond rating, and it's not really starving capital, it's still a plan to use capital, but to use it in sort of methodical. The disadvantage is to, Wendy picked right up on it, it's 5 million a year in bonding, and your plan right now is not 5 million a year in bonding. So does that mean you can't do projects? Maybe. It might mean you need to plan your debt and do half a project. It might mean aggressive pursuit of grants, federal grants. But it is gonna involve prioritization, cause everything you have on that plan, and I appreciate Mark putting it out there, there's a lot of wants. We're telling you there's not a lot of revenue. So you got 5 million a year, figure it out. And I think our board is pretty set on not moving on that until the grant list starts to come in.
Given what we know today.
Given what we know today. Something would have to change in our base assumptions for us to move off that. And
So just like a little caveat, so since we bond every other year, it's 2 years that impacts the debt service. So although it's set at 5 million a year, you can do 10 million every 2 years. So you could do 7 million in 1 year and 3 million in another, if you wanna break it up that way. Or however, as long as you stay within the 10 million every 2 years.
So that's gonna be a bit of work before April 3rd for you guys, cause we do wanna see a CIP that shows that this can work before we commit all those reserves. We don't wanna commit reserves to a plan that right, and we need to sustain this because we can't do tax increases like we've been doing. This is gonna we're gonna get the taxes down to 5.9, we think, but that's on top of the 5.1. That's a 10% increase over the last year. If that continues in the next 4.9. So thank you. But if that continues, that's 2,500 more a year in taxes for the median taxpayer. And we are already at the high end of our peer groups in mill rate, so we cannot do that. Right.
So I have another question. When we are we not, it probably doesn't matter in this shuffle here, but the town manager's budget used a different amount from reserves. Are we taking that back to reserves? So it's gonna be bonded. So the splash pad 150, it's gonna be bonded.
That one.
It's gonna go back to the town manager's proposed. They can make changes afterwards if they wanna take 150,000 and show the impact, but for the purposes of their capital plan, we're gonna reset it.
Cause otherwise, we're gonna have a huge jump in debt service this year and next year, which we cannot afford. Or what we're hearing from the public, that when we have a plan to do it, it does mean that there's less money available for bonding. I do wanna say the reason why we have capital reserves is because we do take a plan for how we bond capital, how we raise funding for capital. You can either put it in the budget or you can use conservative revenue. When you have conservative revenue at year-end close, take those savings, you don't spend it, it's not Oprah holiday, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car off budget. That money stops, it's the people's money, it gets appropriated in the next year's budget as a revenue source there, so that it takes the taxes down the next year. It's sort of like it's a wonderful life, the concept. It is a funding mechanism, it is not hooray, or they misbudgeted, or it's a crazy idea. It is how we budget for capital, it enables us to fund capital in the ensuing year. This limits some of that ability. But we have to do that to get us back on track. Amy's proposal, and I don't disagree, is over time, we would like to build a little more capital into the operating budget, but we can't afford it right now, which is why we're not doing the payback. Next year, if we have a little bit of grand list, maybe we put 100,000 in the transfer line and slowly build that up 100,000 a year if we can afford it, but that depends on the grand list. We don't have to do it as a payback, we can just methodically increase it until we get to 1 million. Maybe that takes us 10 years. If we have a great grand list year, that's the year we wanna do that investment. But that requires discipline because other departments may say, hooray, I can hire this person and this person and this person. So that's the compromise you make. Which do you wanna do? And policy decisions involved in that. And there's no right or wrong answer. But that's why it might not work, 'cause other choices may take priority. But that's sort of the theory behind it. We're trying to solve for capital, we're trying to solve for the long-term tax increases, still not great. We wanna get those down below 2.5. And really below 2, we'd love to have no tax increase, but that's gonna depend on grand list growth. But 3%, if you look at what other towns assume on normal growth, municipal budgets, it's about 3%. Why is that? Because inflation is 2.5, 2.75. Municipal is usually a little bit bigger than that because we have materials and negotiated salaries, so slightly more than inflation, but it shouldn't be a lot more than inflation, right? So are these reasonable assumptions? Yes. Amy used conservative 4%, we think we can get it back to 3, we used to be at the 3% challenge. But if the grand list grows, we can have other conversations. So that's sort of where we are, and to Wendy's point, our community is gonna have to decide, do we want the grand list to grow, or do we wanna pay more taxes, or do we wanna ask the neighbors who've lived here for 60 years, lovely to have you, move along. I mean, really, these are the conversations we're gonna have to decide. So a couple of things from our board, is there anyone who disagrees with this approach, or is there consensus we should pursue this sort of hybrid plan?
I'm on board.
With what Amy just showed.
Yeah.
No, I like that.
On board, yeah.
So, by unanimous consent, Amy, can you then please prepare motions for April 3rd for us to review? On April 3rd, we may take them on the 16th, because there may be, we wanna see that, okay. To do this is gonna require some manipulation because the Board of Selectmen had the payback in their program, so we'll take that out. By unanimous consent, we'll ask Amy to reduce the 60 as planned. But we still need to pay for those projects, so we're gonna need to use the 300,000 and the 700,000 for the Board of Ed through either capital reserves or current year savings, and I think we should use capital reserves because we have them now and we're gonna replenish them later, but plan on that through capital reserve. We're gonna need from the Board of Ed, we're gonna do 500 in buses that they've already suggested, but then they still need 200, we need 200 worth of projects for them so that we can identify. From Mark, you have 750 in the traditional payback. That needs to go back to 416, so you need to identify which projects are gonna use about 300 to use from capital reserves, but we'll need to know what those projects are. The other thing we're gonna need to do by unanimous consent is to have Amy plan for a motion to assign dollars in the general fund reserves for the healthcare cliff. So we'll do that, an assignment, and Melissa's gonna work on that. For Simsbury Volunteer Ambulance Association, it's in capital reserves this year. Next year, we know there's a problem, 200 that's coming into the operating budget and half a mechanic. So one of the things I talked to Amy about, we could assign 100,000 in capital reserves and feather that in. Next year SVAA is 100 operating, 100 capital reserves in the following year. It finally gets in, if we need to do some mill rate stabilization to feather that in, because we know it's gonna be a hard year. So it might be worth to assign that. We don't have to make that decision tonight, but let's go ahead and prepare the motion in case that's what our board wants to do with that. We're gonna, Amy's gonna have us, are we gonna have the quarterly report April 3rd or April 16th? Do we know?
I don't know yet.
What?
Probably the 16th,
Okay.
but
So then we'll definitely
I
do
can
the
do.
motions on the 16th, cause we'll need to review the quarterly before we do that, just to make sure we haven't missed anything. We have the audit presentation on Thursday, I know Todd can't make that. If anyone else is unavailable, please let me know, we wanna make sure we have a quorum check. I did speak with Amy and Melissa earlier today about motions. We're starting to plan the motions as we get to the budget actually adoption. And first of all, thank you. You're welcome. Melissa, getting us the line items. Our board does not approve the budget book. We don't approve your goals. We don't approve your metrics. And you don't want us to, I'm pretty sure.
Or the pictures,
Or the pictures.
right?
We do approve those.
I know you do.
We cast judgment on those. But so what we'll do is we'll get the motions, this is in conversations working with Bert, I know probably more explanation than needs to be, but with Bob DiCrescenzo, we sort of went through what is it we're approving and can we get it all in one document so that we're not flipping through multiple pages. So we're just gonna attach the line items to our motion. Same motions, but with the line items. We do our capital projects by capital project, not bottom line, so we'll include the CNR projects. For many years, we had no CNR projects, so this wasn't an issue, right? But just like the CIP, when we get from capital improvement plan, when we get from our bond council, they do bond resolutions for the big capital. We don't need it for the big capital, but we are gonna outline which capital projects we're approving, because once they are approved, they cannot exceed the amount that we approved. But upon the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen and the approval of the Board of Finance, with the one policy exception for that 5,000, which we'll put in the motions as well that we did last year. So we'll do that. The other thing we're gonna do in our motions upon recommendation of council last year is our board has the right by charter upon the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen to do transfers between departmental appropriations after 6 months. But it has been perplexing through the ages as to what exactly is a department. So we're gonna put that in the motion and define it so that you guys don't have to debate, is this a department or not? I put a summary together that is broader than the line items because we don't need to get into your line items. So there's so the police department would be police, dispatch, it's everything together, right? Public works would not be highway, building, it would just be public works, so 4 million. Police would just be the 6 million. Town manager would be, but Mark and Amy and Melissa will go through it and make sure you're comfortable with it, cause it is what we determined it to be. But it makes sense to do the broad categories, and we had discussed this with the previous board, so we'll just lay it out so Mark doesn't have to worry, oh, as long as I'm within this appropriation, I can just move stuff around. But he's subject to the Board of Selectmen approval, you don't need to come to us. So that will just give some clarity there, so tightening up our motions just a little bit, so it'll look a little differently, but essentially the same approvals. And I think that's all I have. So is there any objection to what I have just stated? Okay, so by unanimous consent, this is what we're doing.
Not to the third thing, no, I'm just joking.
By unanimous consent, this is what we're doing.
Just wanna make sure that the motions with the numbers that we can kind of like,
Time out.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, listening to the explanation, you know,
They're
a little difficult, kinda in the air, but
So the motions are gonna be
Yes,
very,
right.
there's gonna be a ton of motions, cause one motion is gonna be,
well, that's why I think it's important to be able to see them and
yes,
kinda
the-
annotate it.
the motions are gonna be very, the first motion will be delete 300,000 from traditional payback in the Board of Selectmen motion. Second motion, add 300,000 to capital reserve to pay for these. So it's gonna be very reduce here, add here, reduce here, add here, reduce here,
Yeah.
add here.
I'd like to make sure that we can at least see the stream of numbers so we can see the ins and outs. So we can follow along to see what that motion is
But
doing.
to your point, I think what we've done is very healthy. We've had a conceptual framework of how to proceed with request for unanimous consent, it's been given. We all agree this is where we want to go. Now, it gets written up into specific things that you can dig into when she draws up the motions.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
And so we have a chance to to get granular and to look at exactly what we're executing. So you have the buy-in from the board to proceed in this direction, and then we're gonna look at the actual mechanics of how to do that when it's drawn up.
So this is why we are not gonna be approving the motion on April 3rd, cause it's gonna take Amy and Melissa a little bit of time to get those and Mark to get them, and I'll review them as well. And we'll get council to review them. But then for the board to review them and make sure it has the information we want, it may take a few revisions because this is a little bit more complicated than what we've done in the past. Not that much more complicated, but because we are changing your budget in significant manners, although substantively not a lot of changes that I'm aware of, although I just do wanna give public notice, and of course, your board obviously knows this. After the hearing, depending on what we hear from the residents, we'll have an opportunity to do additional motions. But if anyone knows of a motion they're planning on making before the April 3rd, if they could just get it to Amy so that she can prepare it. Motions may come up during the meeting that we haven't considered, so
Don't forget the 500,000 for revenue.
it was in her model, we got it.
I know, I had to say.
But that's why we're gonna get it, and hopefully Amy will get those, if we can get those a week in advance so that we can go through it, that would be helpful, but we're not gonna take those motions on April 3rd because it will take some time to review them, and also we're gonna have to wait on bond council. So,
I still have another question, I know.
Yeah.
And this is for Mark, Amy, and for Tom. We are gonna have to look at our CIP, right?
Yeah.
I don't yet, from this, I don't have a idea in my head where exactly we have to go, right, what's the number and from where, like bonding, if we're not using reserves or we're only using the proposed reserves. That sounds like it means we're gonna be cutting some capital projects for this year and proposed for next year.
not for this year,
Not
right,
for this
Amy?
Oh, so this year we're okay?
Actually take more.
Take more.
Okay.
No, so okay, good, I just wasn't sure how much we were gonna be on the hook for right now, but you're saying this year we seem to be at the right level. Next year-
You're under 5 million.
Okay, good.
We didn't go over the line for a couple of years.
I was gonna say, so then would it be actually, should we look at more projects for this year?
No.
No.
That's not.
But it
Sorry, that was a little aggressive, it wasn't meant to be, but no.
Let's have
I wasn't sure, like, but I didn't know if you like to offset for future years, like stay where we are now. Next year is where we have to really look at a
And then
crunch,
it's
yes.
the out years, you really gotta get that down. And to be very clear, debt service, no more than 7% is our target. We don't wanna be at 7%. We would like to get that down so that we can start create capacity for Squadron Line. We will commit, or
Right.
at least in concept, to keeping it, the debt, that payment at a level 8 or 9 million, because we wanna create that capacity. But anything you can do to get borrowing down, we gotta do it. Because we have big borrowing coming down the road and we can't do it if we sustain this, so get it as low as you can. That does mean hard choices, we got that. It does mean some of the big projects you wanna do, can't do them probably for 10 years, 15 years. Or you gotta get some federal dollars, and there's a lot of federal dollars out there, so let's get those dollars.
So where you're talking about it now, are there areas where you're concerned about any deferred maintenance where we might limit capital projects that would impact the bond rating?
Well, so we looked at what do we need to maintain our current assets, and our rate of depreciation is generally about 6 million a year. Between that and the capital reserves, we should be able to maintain our assets. But of course, that's an issue.
Sure.
I would hope that in your prioritization, it would be public safety, maintain current assets as the top two priorities. And then after that, it might be spend to save, priorities, economic development. I mean, you'll go through these prioritizations have been around since the 1970s. They're public safety, maintain current assets are your top priorities. If you're doing something new and not maintaining your current assets, that's where our board will intervene and say, we need you to preserve the assets we have right now. That's only where our board will start to intervene in your choices.
So going back to something that you had said about remembering hires for next year, I even wrote it down and where we are coming in at already 2.5 of hires from the additional mechanic and then SVAA. But knowing that one of our priorities, and we talked about it was on our slide and we keep referring to them here, is grants and getting a dedicated grant writer. Like, when are we gonna be able to have that in a hire? Because that is where we have a grant writer dedicated to grant writing for our town and these projects, whether it's capital improvement projects, whether it, getting these federal dollars that we are leaving on the table.
So there are two things you can do. One, you can do zero-based budgeting. This is a more important hire than some of these other positions, especially a vacant position. We're not gonna fill that.
Right.
This has a hire, that's one. Two, with a lot of grant writers, they often are paid through the bond issue.
Bondage, yeah.
So they don't have to be through your operating budget. So as with everything, look at not just the need, but the funding source. Does it have to come from the operating budget? And the answer is does not. Two, if it does come from the operating budget, the operating budget doesn't have to be additive. If something is more important to you, something can fall off.
Yeah.
So that's how I would look at it, because there is not the capacity to grow without doing that. I don't see it anyway, without some grand list.
Or squeeze money out of your budget so that you have the room in the budget for that FTE.
Right, but
I just know we wanna have that as a priority,
That
knowing
makes
that we're already
sense.
coming in, so.
well, if that
I
is
just-
your priority, then the job is to
right.
find the cuts.
I'm just putting it out there so people
Yeah.
know that it is where we are, what we're looking at. And I agree with you.
Yeah, that's to Bert's point, where can we cut, where can we find efficiencies? Mark can't find them in 2 months, but he can find them in a year.
Yeah.
Is our hope. Alright, are there any other questions, concerns? As we just process-wise, because we do have a lot of new people on the board, here's the way it'll work. When we get to the public hearing, we'll do the Board of Finance presentation first, then the Board of Ed, then the Board of Selectmen. We'll then open it up for the public hearing, 3 minutes, an opportunity to speak. Members can speak more than once, but they have to let everyone else go first. So we'll go until that ends. As we get comments sent in to us, we'll ask Amy to include them in the minutes. We're not gonna read the comments out loud as we did during the COVID, but we will include them in the minutes so that the record will be kept there. After that, we will close the speaking part of the hearing and then continue the hearing until April 16th. At that point, we'll have discussions, probably review the motions, see if there are any additional motions we need to make at that point, and then do a second hearing on the 16th plan. There's always the chance that we'll wrap it up on the 3rd. I don't see that happening with the complex motions and some of the stuff we're doing. I don't wanna rush the motions, wanna make sure we get it right and accurate and give people an opportunity to speak at multiple hearings, because it is a very large tax increase over 2 years, and we're very aware of that. Your job will be to communicate that. I'm sure you have a plan to put that out, press release and stuff to let people know about the hearing. So we think we can get it to a 493. Unless something comes up, I will say in the past, sometimes when we get the quarterly, something does reveal itself that makes it harder for us to do that, which is why we're gonna review the quarterly, but as of right now, Mark, it is dependent, you're looking at a big savings in your budget. I hope it's there at the year end, and we're gonna ask you, can it be there, cause this plan kind of depends on that, right?
3 million, I forget the number, but yes, we'll be.
You're just 1.6, we had some,
Oh.
we had
No,
some.
3 million,
Where's
that'd
the
be
top
great.
line?
Yeah, if you can give us 3
And
million.
thank you for everything you've done, really, terrific work, everybody did it.
I think it was a
Terrific job.
teamwork everyone put in, it's not ideal, I mean, the stool is stable, but it's still 5% tax increase, got it. And we're not happy about that, I don't think anyone's happy about that, but to make it lower would be really cuts that would start to be impactful to services. But we'll hear from the public, and it's not our money, it's their money, we'll hear how they wanna spend their money. And then of course we'll put it to a vote, I really get that. But I think this is a reasonable compromise, preserving the assets of the town, preserving services and trying to get it lower rate. And then more importantly, solving some of the out years, not solving but making them slightly better we're gonna need everyone to focus like a laser on the out years, cause it's lean budgets. Unless grand list comes roaring in. So I'm glad, I'm very pleased to hear that's your top priority. Right, anything else? With that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Minutes.
We need to approve minutes.
Minutes,
I move that we approve minutes.
thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Is there any discussion on the minutes? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. May I have a motion to
Move to
adjourn?
adjourn.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.